Welcome to Limelight Arts Travels podcast, a closer look. You probably know that Dionysos was an ancient Greek god associated with wine. In this episode, archaeologist Dr Kristen Mann joins Limelight's Dr Nick Gordon to talk about a painted vessel from the 5th century BCE. Now in the National Archaeological Museum, it is decorated with imagery that takes us into the world of Athens, the feast of Dionysos and the new season's wine, and a celebration of community that involves an intriguing coming-of-age ritual for young children.
Well, good morning, Kristen, and thanks for coming in to talk to us about this delightful object. Perhaps we could start by you telling us a little about what it is that we're discussing.
All right, so this is a small wine pouring jug. It's called a hues, or the plural's hoes, and we only know so much about it. It was found somewhere in Attica, near Kouropi, a little village there. We don't know its actual context, but it probably came from a grave, potentially a children's grave. But we've been able to date it based on its shape and style to around the middle of the 5th century BC. So 450 to 400, potentially towards the end of that century. And it's also been attributed to a specific painter, the Eretria painter, based on sort of key quirks of how the artist did it.
So what sort of quirks would that include? So I know there are stylistic things in terms of the shape, the type of the vessel, the style of painting that you've mentioned that allow us to date it, more or less.
Yeah.
But how do you attribute it to a specific person?
This is actually really cool. In terms of the shape, it's this sort of evolution of the physicality of the vessel. Size, the particular quirk of the lip. It's like if you asked a bunch of teenagers to put their mobile phones on the table, they could immediately order them in sequence based on key features as they've evolved. So we can do this with pots. But when it comes to the attribution of painters, that was this whole other level. It was pioneered by a scholar called Beasley, and he borrowed techniques from Renaissance art painting. And it really relies on particularly high repetition things where the artist will fall into a certain pattern, a particular flick of the brush, a particular way of drawing flowers or something like that. So the people who did these studies just went into close detail of things like eyes, toes, how were the hands drawn, what was the border pattern like. And they identified traits that actually really what they're looking at is the training of artists and how were they taught, and then what were the kind of physical patterns and habits they evolved, which they would then pass on to their apprentices and trainees. So they end up identifying connections that look at the industry and the technical side of the entire thing. Yeah. It's actually a really cool thing that we can do in classical Greece that a lot of other areas of archaeology don't have that same level, because pots were just so mass produced, really. There's just so many of them, and they survive really well.
They've got such a large sample size to work from to be able to build that out. And when we look at a work like this, you can see just sort of that extraordinary detail in the line, in the faces, in the other motifs around it. Perhaps could you describe more about the object, the painting, and what's being depicted on it?
Yeah, okay. So it's a small squat jug. It's pretty solid and hefty. It's like what you'd find in many a Greek taverna today. It's about 22 centimeters tall, and it's got this lovely, pleasing glossiness to its surface and its texture. But it's quite chunky and solid. It's got this central gravity to it. It has this cheery little bulge that comes out around its belly as it flares out. And it's also very well made and shaped, though. The clay is actually quite thin. It's made by a master potter to actually make this on a wheel and flare it out, particularly around the mouth. So the mouth would have been finished by shaping it and pinching it into this. It has this clover-like shape, or more like a kind of club on a deck of cards at the mouth. We call it a trefoil mouth. And they would have carefully pinched it. But if you look at it, you can see it's really even. You've got no signs of those finger works. They finished it after shaping it. They've polished it and finished it off. And so some people thought this was meant to be able to aid multi-directional pouring. But if you look at it, the two little flares of clover are too close. You try bending your wrist backwards while holding a jug. It doesn't work. It's a one-way pour, but it is easy to pour one-handed. These are actually meant to be really easy pouring vessels. And actually in ancient Athens, they were a standard unit of measurement, these particular pots. They're around 3.5 liters is what it's equivalent to, plus or minus a little bit more. So, it's got this very practical function. The handles are really comfortable distance. You're not going to graze your knuckles against the neck or anything like that. There's been a lot of thought put into this comfortable design that's still aesthetically pleasing at the same time. So there's this practicality to it, but then it's got this really elaborate image, this beautiful image on the front. The imagery is in a panel that cuts it off from the rest of the pot. It's like a window into the inside of the pot, this rectangular frame that's only on the outward side that would have been poured from.
So does that make this the side that would be easiest to see while it was being poured, or was this the side that the pourer would see?
Not the side that the pourer would see. It's the side that everybody else would see while using it. So it's the front of the pot.
Yeah.
It's
what's being depicted on there with the four figures. It's a curious scene, to say the least.
The scene itself, it's something where it's almost like a snapshot, like a photo of a frozen moment on time. You've got an older man with a young boy. He's preparing to put a boy into a swing that's suspended from the vegetal motif at the top of the panel. That's just ornamentation, but it gives this sense of an outdoor garden space. It's actually kind of cool.
That's really clever.
And on one side, you've got to the right, there's this strange arrangement of a cloth and seats and a few details we'll come back to, but it's balanced on the left by two younger boys who are standing, looking and watching and witnessing what Dad is doing with the little boy. And this scene, it looks like we're just seeing a family photo to our eyes. But actually, this is a shorthand for a lot of complex social customs, ideas, and resonant meanings that an Athenian viewer would immediately understand the shorthand and the collapsing of time and event into this one single image. We are aliens, we're foreigners to this, so we can decode some of it, but we miss so much more, and we don't know what we don't know. So when it comes to trying to decode this and look into the clues, if you come close and look sort of closer at the figures, the father and the youngest boy are both crowned. They've got these laurel wreaths on their heads. This is something which is associated with festivities, particular religious things. The drinking in the symposia is actually a religious event, and putting on these laurel crowns is entering into this transcendent realm. So we see these at weddings, at rites of passage, and at religious festivals. And so that's one of the clues that we've got something special. This isn't just Dad playing in the backyard with the boys. And we've got a few other details too, like their clothing. It's the dad and the son in the chair, in the swing. Their clothes are actually drawn off their shoulders and off their body and hanging around their around their waists. And this is associated with artisans and craft people and workers. So some people have argued that what we're seeing potentially could even be like a self-portrait by the painter themselves as an artisan, and this is like what they'd wear. To me, it's probably the more practical fact of Athenian clothing and Greek clothing is very draping and in the way. If you want to do something like swing your child, and there's a specific meaning going on here, you need it out of the way. So it's just so Dad can get his kid up into the swing and they're not going to get tangled and messed up around the swing.
You mentioned there are particular significances here around kind of the laurel wreath wearing, around the clothing, around the action that's taking place. What is it that allows us to is it something that we can read to being about a particular event or festival? Because you said it's not just Dad picking his kid up and to have a play in the backyard. There's a bit more to it.
Yeah. And this is where there's a bit of, it's a bit more challenging to try to kind of make that connection. There's a few clues. One of the key clues is the actual pot itself. These pots, the hoas, were actually very strongly connected to a very specific Anthesteria festival in Athens. This is a spring festival. It's a celebration of Dionysos, and we'll can talk about it in a bit more detail later, but these jugs were associated with a drinking contest that was part of it, as well as being something that people would use as part of the civic communal feast that happened in celebration and honoring of the god. So the pot itself has this strong cultic significance. The imagery on the front, though, is a little bit different. It's connected to it, but it's a point of debate as to whether or not what we're seeing is actually a particular ritual that would have been done. We know about it. It's called the aora, and it's a rite of sort of protecting your child by trying to swing away the bad spirits and bad luck and misfortune that might be around them. This is associated with that festival, but some people debate that. But the imagery, the reason we know that this is more than just a dad playing there is the wreaths on their heads. It's the solemnness of the way the two older brothers are witnessing and watching it, with one has his arm around the other. It's either in a sense of comfort or this united intimacy at this very specific, significant moment. Underneath the swing, if you look on the ground, there's also some laurel boughs, and these were associated with protective properties. At weddings and different events, you would sprinkle people and bless them with water like you see in religious events today. There's a lot of these images of children on swings. The interesting thing is that they're actually usually young girls rather than boys. This is one of the only ones that we have that shows a boy, and it's actually very rare to see a dad and his children in this kind of intimate setting. Dad's normally in a very different role. You see mothers and their children. So this pot's actually quite unusual in a lot of different ways. There's clues like that. There's the reference and the cross-referencing with the text, the shape of the pot, what we know it was associated with. But there's also the clothing. Like Dad's got these super fancy sandals on. These are like really fancy 7 straps of very elaborate sandals. And on the other side, on the chair, what you're actually seeing in the corner there is you've got this chair with, actually it looks like it's a woman's himation, her outer cloak, and then another person's festive clothing with another person's wreath. And it's incredibly elaborate. This is formal wear. This is going out in your Sunday best. And you also have these wraps, kind of cakes. Some people think they're bread, but they're festival food that you would have brought out to participate in the festival. And on top of them is this big, wide bowl. It's called a fiale. It's this offering bowl for pouring libations. So we've got all of these clues that indicate that this is a very significant moment, and we can cross-reference the actual swinging as well as these details and the pot to kind of put together what this is connected to.
Yeah. So putting all those details then together and those different sources and the quite wide body of knowledge, what sort of event or what sort of festival is this pointing us towards?
So this is looking like it's the Anthesteria festival, this massive festival of Dionysos. And it's actually really cool in so many ways. It's an unusual festival in some ways. There's some very unusual events that go on. But it's primarily meant to celebrate a few key things. It's honoring Dionysos as the gifter of the knowledge on how to make wine, but also the combination of him and his nymphs and adding the secret of mixing water with wine, which was something that the Greeks prided themselves on this, that it transformed the wine into something most excellent, that is civilized. It's an extra level, again, it's a divine gift. And they prided themselves on their civilized way of drinking that has very elaborate roles and rituals involved. And so this is celebrating the gifts that come from Dionysus. But it's also connected in myth to a story about Orestes and the king of Athens at the time, who Orestes is famous for killing his mother because he was supposed to kill the killer of his father. His mother was Clytemnestra, who killed her husband, if anyone knows the story from Troy and the Iliad and the place from ancient Athens. So Orestes, according to ancient Greek customs, was polluted by the murder. There's actually really fun stories of this idea of pollution. Like, there was a knife. People didn't want to get the person who committed a murder that was seen as good for the city in one way or another. They didn't want to punish that person, so they transferred the pollution to the knife, and the knife was thrown off and murdered as punishment. There's weird ways of getting around pollution. And so what we see with this festival is one of these contortions. So Orestes is polluted. He can't come anywhere near sacred spaces. He will de-sanctify them and damage them. Anyone who's associated with him will be polluted as well. So the king's solution to get around this, because Orestes is visiting Athens and the king wanted to honor him, but he hasn't had his trial, he hasn't been cleared and ritually purified yet. So he hosts this big celebration and this welcome feast outside the city, orders all of the sanctuaries to be closed so there's no risk of pollution and cross-contamination. And he has this big feast, and it involves, this is where the story of the drinking contest comes from. He gave every man at the feast a kouis, and I always struggle with pronouncing that word. And the challenge was that they had to drink theirs. Whoever drank their entire volume, 3.5 liters of wine, got a cheesecake as reward. But because also anything connected with this with Orestes and this feast was considered now contaminated, it couldn't be brought home, it couldn't be dedicated in a normal sanctuary. So the king ordered that they had to take their festive drinking crowns and their cup that was, not the cup, the pouring jug that was used and all of the equipment. And they had this massive drunken procession off to a particular sanctuary to Dionysos that was in a marshy area outside of the city proper, where the priestess, this sanctuary was only opened once a year. And the priestess received all of the contaminated equipment, and the participants were purified and offered libations and made their religious things. So the entire thing is connected to an ancient king and his ego and wanting to have this largesse host for this very famous visiting, other king or other royal member, and doing his little artful contortion to get around the rules.
So wondering then, kind of, how does this then come to involve a child going onto the swing?
Yeah, so that's all the origin story and the purpose of the festival. This festival is a 3-day celebration, which is also really actually about celebrating the most recently made vintage of wine. In the autumn, the viticulturalists would have harvested the grapes and pressed it into wine. It's then stored in large storage jars called pithoi. And it's very probable that what we're seeing sunk in the ground, I forgot to mention that in the image between the brothers and the dad and the son, is the top of a pithos standing. It's been sunk and set into the ground, and it's often featured in these swinging imagery. So again, that's another clue and another parallel. So what would happen as well, this is what makes this festival so unusual, is this festival isn't just the Athenians in the cities, it's not just a small part, it's the entire city polis of Athens, including all of the regional farmers and everyone. Everyone who made wine that year would bring their wine in carts and wagons full of oxen from all the farmers, bringing their entire season's vintage of newly made wine into the city. The priests are organizing this traffic jam on the first day and directing all of the traffic. And what would happen is everybody's wine would be opened up ceremonially as part of this religious rite to Dionysos. And you always had to offer the first fruit of your harvest to a deity as part of this. And so the first part or portion of the wine would be dedicated to Dionysos. And after that, then the wine would be consumed communally. Not all of the wine, obviously, it's the entire season's crop, but there would be a big celebration. And wine was really fundamental. Everybody had a vested interest in it, in its success, that this year's was a good crop. For their own consumption, wine was drunk by everybody, slaves, citizens, women, children, to a much more diluted degree. But also it's critical to religion. Every single religious rite involves a libation of wine. So pouring libations, having a steady, reliable supply is critical to your connection to the gods and guaranteeing their happiness with you and your success. And then there'd be another feast after that, and that begins the Day of the Dead, So this was when the Athenians believed that their ancestors could actually come back on this day, and they wanted to make sure everyone's cool. So they invite them to a feast and a banquet. But this is, again, it's dangerous. Like Orestes, there's pollution and risk. So you need to protect. This is why all the sanctuaries would be shut down on the third day. It's the day when everyone would visit their graves and their families and their ancestors as well and make offerings. But it was also probably when this swing rite might have, if it did happen in association with this, you want to do everything you can to protect especially your youngest children who are very vulnerable to death. So until the age of around 3-ish, plus or minus a bit, they were sub-adult, sort of, not even subhuman, but they're not social citizens or full members of the community. They belong in the house, in the domestic sphere. They're not really seen as people yet. But once they reached around their third birthday, then on the next following festival, this Antisteria festival, there was a crowning of these young boys, where they were officially acknowledged now as boys, as children, and they'd moved from being in the care of their mother to being handed over to a pedagogos, who was their tutor, who'd begin their education towards manhood.
So many of those ideas you've been talking about together, that kind of transformative experience, like that kind of liminal state, that sense of risk, but also with that kind of, like with Orestes, that sense of being a way of returning somebody to the community. So thank you very, very much, Kristen.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to Limelight Arts Travels podcast, A Closer Look. It was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land and their elders past and present.